guest is Duke Goldman. He's a baseball history researcher and writer. I know you've taught courses, been an instructor at UMass Amherst, New York University, St. John's University. I think it's fair to say you have a particular interest in the history of African Americans in baseball, the old Negro Leagues, and the integration of Major League Baseball. You've now authored an article, The Double Victory Campaign and the Campaign to Integrate Baseball. Double Victory Campaign. Very, very few people, I think, know about or remember this effort, championed largely by the black-owned newspapers of the time and a few white sports writers, to basically say, we've got to win the war against the Nazis and the Japanese, and we've got to win the war at home against segregation.
Well, what happened was the Pittsburgh Courier, which was the leading African-American paper of its day, got a letter. And the letter was written by a cafeteria worker, a 26-year-old cafeteria worker, and he wrote a letter to them, and he said, this was essentially 2 months after Pearl Harbor. He said, what are we going to do in Black America? We have a real problem on our hands because here we are fighting a war against fascism abroad, and we're suffering here in the United States. Well, I'm not sure that we should be involved in this. In order to be involved in it, we have to feel like we can fight for two victories at the same time. And he even said in this letter, you know, it's when people are in these positions of sacrifice that progress is made. It was almost like he had a sense of what was to come. And he said, we need a double victory. We have to fight at home at the same time that we fight abroad. Now, the Courier figured out very quickly that this was a catchphrase. This was a brand, if you will, if you move it into today's 21st century parlance. And they put that brand, they developed a logo, and the next week they put that logo on the front of their paper, which came out once a week. And within weeks, there were 200 double victory clubs all over Black America. There were thousands of people who were involved. The Courier started running feature pieces, articles. It just spread throughout Black America.
I guess it's just one more indication of how often African American and minority history is just shunted to the side, that this campaign that really, as you trace it, we want to talk more about this, but really helps lead to the civil rights movement in the 1960s, this double victory campaign, almost unknown to most of us.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you know, and I do think it speaks to the idea that Black America and white America were on parallel paths more than intertwining paths. So the reality for Black America was they worked, they lived, they struggled, they read their own newspapers. Now, Black America paid a little more attention to white America than white America played to Black America. I mean, you know.
They had to.
They had to, because that was the dominant theme. They did go to Major League games, but they also went to their own games, okay? And
let's talk about that. We had a very strong and star-studded Negro League system then, because so many great players, some of whom would later get to the major leagues, were there. That was the only place they could play in this pre- and early World War II period. Along with the black press, many of these teams adopt the double V symbol. It becomes a campaign for them as well, even with the realization, I guess, for owners that if this works, if we break down segregation, a lot of our stars are going to go to the white-dominated major leagues.
The owners had their own dilemma. What do we promote here? We want to keep our businesses going, but, you know, they did recognize, after all, that things had to change. Now, here comes this campaign, and now we have an owner, a man by the name of Cumberland Posey, and Cumberland Posey owned the Homestead Grays, which was one of the two biggest and most successful teams in Negro League Baseball. And Posey said, you know, we ought to put double victory patches on our sleeves because this campaign is the most important thing going on in our world today. At the same time, you had stars like Monty Irvin, like Josh Gibson, like Satchel Paige, who were all relegated to playing only in stadiums that the owners of the Negro Leagues did not own. Sometimes they were playing in places like Yankee Stadium when the Yankees were on the road. There were white promoters who were getting percentages of the take just by allowing black players to play. The black players had short schedules. They were barnstorming, traveling on buses across America. But World War II ended up being the heyday of black baseball, in part because so many white ball players were away. Now, there were black players in the military, but it was not quite to the same degree, and there were still a few stars. More of the stars were still home playing. And so black baseball was taking off.
You mentioned Satchel Paige, who went on to pretty good career in the major leagues. I don't think anybody ever really knew how old he was. He played well into his senior years,
Yes.
really, we think.
Yes.
He was apparently in favor of the double victory campaign, but he had very specific thoughts. I found this fascinating. Never heard this before. He worried about the integration of the major leagues in terms of player by player. He had different thoughts.
His fear was that it would be very isolating for one player to go in, that they would be treated horribly, that they wouldn't be able to make it. And so he put forth the idea that it would be better for a team of black players to integrate baseball, which then apparently Bill Veeck, who later owned the St. Louis Browns and the Cleveland Indians and the Chicago White Sox, he supposedly tried to follow up on that and buy the Philadelphia Phillies. That is still being debated by researchers today, whether he really actively, Bill Veeck, pursued that. But Page said these things and questioned whether integration had become ripe and it was ready for it, and then he got in trouble for it. The black press was all over him to the point where at an all-star game, an East-West all-star game in 1942, he got on the loudspeaker in the middle of the game to say that he had been misquoted.
Let me ask you, you mentioned another great player, Monty Irvin, who crossed over from the Negro Leagues to the major leagues. And I know I was fascinated by the fact you're in touch with him now. You're writing a book, working on a book that will focus on him.
Well,
Tell us
it'll
about
focus
that.
on him and the team he played on, which was the 1946 Newark Eagles. Monty Irvin could have been the man who integrated baseball. He was a much bigger star in the Negro Leagues than Jackie Robinson was. And some of the Negro League owners said they thought he would be the best person to integrate. It turned out he went away to Europe in World War II, and Jackie did not, and that had a lot to do with why Jackie ended up getting picked. In 1946, the Newark Eagles won the Negro League World Series in 7 games against the Kansas City Monarchs, who starred, amongst other players, Satchel Paige and Buck O'Neill. Irvin was the star of that team. He also played with Larry Doby, who ended up on that team. He then was the second black player in the major leagues playing for the Cleveland Indians. Irvin hit 3 home runs and drove in 8 runs in a 7-game series win in 1946. Go ahead.
Only about a minute left, and I want to make sure we do this because it's so important. The double victory campaign, you say in your article, really brings us to the integration of baseball, brings us to the next year, the integration of the U.S. military, and that starts us toward the 50s and 60s, the civil rights movement itself.
Absolutely. This is why I love studying baseball and sports history in general, because it's a prism through which we can look at American history. And sometimes some of the advances actually occur in sports. The double victory, though, really started outside of sports, but it melded with baseball when we had double victory games and they had people flashing the double victory logo. And eventually, what people saw so easily was that the fields of play in America were very equivalent to the fields of war in Europe. And so when you had black players then playing with white players, inevitably this had to lead to other changes.
Duke Goldman, thank you so much for your perspective in the article. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.